Welcome to the Brain Fix podcast, discussing all things brain. I'm Professor David Brough, Professor of Neuroinflammation at the University of Manchester, and today we will be talking about the Jefferson Brain Research Centre, aka the GEF, Manchester's Translational Neuroscience Centre. Joining me today is Professor of Neurosurgery, Professor Omar Pathmanaban, and co-directors of the GEF, Professor of Neuroscience Stuart Allan, and Professor of Neurosurgery Andrew King.
Great. So, we're talking about the Jefferson Brain Research Centre today, something dear to all of our hearts, and we're going to grill you, Andy, and you, Stuart, a little bit on the GEF, if that's okay. So, welcome to the podcast. Maybe let's start with you, Andy, and then you, Stuart, telling us about your background and interests.
So, I became a consultant neurosurgeon in Manchester in about 1998, and at that time really hadn't had any research activity at all and didn't know much about it. But at the same time, there was the opportunity for research registrars to come into play in the NHS, and there was not an obvious amount of research to do here in Manchester. So I had heard of this person, Nancy Rothwell, who at the time was Professor of Neuroscience at the university, and Stuart was working with her, and contacted her and said, could we do some research with these research registrars? And Nancy said yes, and the research started, and I became increasingly interested in it and involved in it, and it just developed for me as an evolution of initially a sideline, and then increasingly a key part of what I really enjoyed doing, trying to do research. So that's my background.
Great. And Stuart?
Great. Yeah, delighted to be here and have this discussion. So, as Andy mentioned, I worked for Nancy Rothwell. I moved here back in 1993, a very long time ago, as a postdoc. So that's basically straight from doing my postgraduate studies, which were in Scotland. And I came here really to start on a journey of trying to find out more about inflammation and how inflammation in the immune system might affect the brain and be important in brain disease. And that was really, in the early 90s, that was really a really revolutionary thought that Nancy had started. So fast forward 20, 30 years, I'm still here, became a professor of neuroscience. And my big interest really is trying to understand how diseases that change how the blood gets to the brain. So the blood getting to the brain is really important, so-called cerebrovascular disease. So that's things like stroke and vascular dementia. And really, we're trying to understand and discover in the lab, what happens in somebody's brain when blood flow is reduced to the brain, what happens to the brain cells, and why does that cause, for example, dementia, or why do strokes arise and what do strokes cause? And we're trying to find treatments for these diseases which really have major impact globally.
So how did the GEF come about, and how long was it in the making?
So I'll kick off there. So this started really back in about 2018. I was, at that point, I had a job. Aside from my research job, I was leading strategic lead for neuroscience in the Faculty of Biology, Medicine and Health here at the university, which was really to try and bring and focus on neuroscience research across all areas to develop it further and get more funding and advance patient care and treatments. And when I was doing that job, I realised there was lots and lots going on. So really great neuroscience happening across various buildings and parts of the university. But it was very fragmented, and what I mean by that was it wasn't joined up. So people were not necessarily working with the right people. People weren't even aware of groups that were doing neuroscience research, and it just felt it wasn't very efficient and the best way to be doing things. And that sort of made me start thinking, well, maybe we need to have some way to focus what we're doing. And that was very much from a university point of view. And I was aware across the city, and Andy will comment in a minute, that there was lots of clinical work going on, and yet the link across was really only in small areas, for example, in stroke.
Yeah, and so at the same time, I'd been watching the research develop and becoming involved in it, but very much my primary role was clinical. And as a clinician, one was aware that the organisation that we work for, as then Salford Royal, now Northern Carolines, but Salford Royal was a world-class clinical neuroscience centre. And it had absolutely appropriately focused on clinical outcome. But it meant that the links with the university were nothing like as strong. I had some through Stuart and through Nancy, but there was a clearly unmet need of neuroscience, not just in stroke, but in brain tumours, in Parkinson's disease and others, and that we needed to try and connect these things. And clinicians need scientists to do the science, and scientists need clinicians. If what scientists want to do is make a difference, and what clinicians want to do is to see things that they're not very good at doing made better. So we decided to make an entity, the Geoff, that actually raised the profile across both sites, so both the university and the clinical environment, so that we could network people together and make the research flow, make connections that didn't previously exist.
So the aim is that connectivity between clinicians and basic scientists, or what is the aim? What's the aim of the Geoff? Is that it, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I think the aim is to promote neuroscience in Manchester, that to make people aware of what extraordinary work there is in a range of fields. Most importantly, to network people together, so that they can, so that the research can develop, and the clinical academic research, the translational research can develop, and then by raising that profile, raising the need to provide an infrastructure, including funding, so that research can move apace, and that research, and this is an important part of the Geoff, is patient-centred, that patients tell us what we want, what bothers them. Obviously, if you've got some awful condition that kills you, that's pretty straightforward, but there are much more nuances, things that we as clinicians and clinical scientists and scientists think we know that they want better, but we don't. So having patient days where patients come along and we tell them what we're doing, and equally importantly, they tell us what they want us to do, is a really key part.
Okay, and the Geoff is growing, and we might talk about that a bit more, but it focuses on a subset of areas. What are those areas, and how did we go about choosing those areas?
Yeah, so this was at the start of the journey a difficult decision, to be honest, because you want to be inclusive, and you want to include everyone you can in any initiative that takes place. But that had happened before, if I'm honest. I'd been here, as I said, for a long time, and I'd seen several initiatives start and fail, whereby it was trying to include everyone in a large homogenous group, a whole group of people doing different things, where it was very broad but no depth. It was really not working very well. So we took a decision to start first of all and look at the clinical side and say, okay, the MCCN, or the Manchester Centre for Clinical Neuroscience, is a massive centre, one of the biggest in Europe. Sees lots and lots of patients in lots of disease areas, all of which are important. But actually, which ones could we put our hand on and say, look, these are really outstanding clinically? So the clinical outcomes have been recognised in various ways, properly recognised as being excellent, are outstanding. And we selected a few of these where, on the other side, if you look across the city towards the university, we could say actually, by proper measures, whether that be research income or capacity in terms of number of people doing the research, the quality of the research, that there is also areas that are excellent at the university, either already excellent or have real potential to become excellent in research point. And really that was the starting point. And when we did that, actually it highlighted a few key areas. And actually one of the great things, to be honest, is that these are areas of great unmet medical need. So stroke and dementia was one area, clearly brain tumours was another one, and then so that was really the starting point. But these were probably the biggest areas we saw as the opportunity, because starting from nothing, or where there's no base, is very difficult. You've got to start from a point of excellence so you can build from there. And then of course what we want to do, and we can, as you say, we'll talk about this later, is use that starting point to then build other areas. So it's not about only focusing on these areas, it's about that's a catalyst to bring everyone else on board.
Yeah, so it's almost reverse engineered. We've gone to the end of the pipeline, namely the clinical side, looked for key indicators that we've got an area of success where we may be able to build, and then gone to the researchers and said, right, we're going to focus on these areas to start with. How can you build in around it? And then over time, we're going to get bigger and grow and use that as an engine to catalyse more.
Exactly.
More groups coming
no,
in.
Absolutely. And that, from the outset, we've tried to get the message across, and we're doing it here now in this meeting, that this is about being inclusive, right? We want the Geoff to grow and be successful for Greater Manchester and beyond. You know, the research that takes place and the discoveries we make and the improvements in patient outcomes we want to be translatable across the world. Ultimately, that's the ambition, in all areas. But of course, we didn't have the resource or the ability to deliver across multiple areas from the outset.
But we have now added to it. So we've got movement disorders and Parkinson's. We've got nano medicine as part of this, and then there's a number of cross-cutting disciplines as well that come into it. And how do you see those cross-cutting disciplines developing? Do you think that we've got everything, or do you think there's more? Do you think we're building a momentum and there's going to be other scientific groups coming in as well?
I think for me, it's one of the characteristics of everything that we've done over the last 20 years is a sort of evolutionary expansion, that the connections are ones that you never planned. I mean, if you look on the two core things of the Geoff, two of the three cores of the Geoff, namely stroke and brain tumours, that 20 years ago, Nancy and Stuart were doing the inflammation, and people like Dave, Prof of neuroinflammation, come in and do inflammation in stroke. But inflammation in brain tumours was not really a thing. And it certainly wasn't what it was now. And again, we'll talk about it, but in the particular tumour that I'm interested in, it's not inflammation one relatively suddenly discovers. It's not just a thing. It is the actual central thing as to how it grows. And I think that the nanotechnology, the graphene, that is, of course, a Manchester Nobel Prize winning discovery, is something that can be the ability to translate. We're using it now, first in man in brain tumours, but the potential for it in epilepsy, which is coming on board. So I really like the sort of innate growth that the profile of what you're doing allows you to develop.
And I do, just to add to that, I think a key thing about the Geoff is that, and somebody always said this from the outset, that it's got to achieve more than the sum of the parts, right? So we want to shift the dial to say, well, okay, this group, stroke, we're doing this anyway, or the brain inflammation group, we're doing this anyway. But what if we put people together? How can they generate more? And I think that's where the cross-cutting themes in that areas come into it, where you actually start to learn across areas, disease areas, where there's common features, where common approaches might be useful. And it's the power of the university in terms of its size and scope, and I think we've only scratched the surface. Nano has come on board, which is fantastic. Imaging is obviously a major part of what we do clinically and pre-clinically. Data science is a major area people talk about. Really, we're not fully yet, I would say, engaged in that data space. Bioengineering, there's huge opportunities, and that's without even going anywhere near the health economics and other things which we want to touch on.
And I think one of the nice things from the clinical side that we'd sort of talked about at the beginning was that maybe the Geoff can be a sort of generator of good stuff in the clinical space as well. And when we've got a number of developing groups wanting to come on board in the future with the Geoff, we're able to work back and forth with them and say, this is the sort of indicators we're looking for clinically. And if you can put your services together in such a way that works, so it interfaces with the research, and then we're cooking on gas, and then they come on board, and it sort of, as you said, Andy, builds in that organic fashion, and so it's improving, I would say, even areas of the clinical space, because people are wanting to come on board, and thereby building that infrastructure and sort of network in other clinical areas where we didn't have as much strength before. I think, if you agree.
Well, I completely agree. And I mean, it is well recognised, well documented, that if you do research in a hospital, the standard of clinical care is better just by the very fact of doing research. I think it's also allied health professionals that if you can't speak after a stroke, or you can't speak because you've got a brain tumour, you need the speech and language people to help you with whichever you've got, and you need their research. If you can't move your right arm, it doesn't really matter whether it's because you've had a stroke or because you've got a brain tumour damaging the brain. You need the physiotherapist, the occupational therapist, the academic within Manchester or wherever to do that. So it crosses over science, allied health professionals, clinicians, but it needs that profile. That is what I think the Geoff does.
So I know the Jeff is still relatively young, but just following those points, are there examples where its presence has made a difference? Are we seeing things happening already that the Jeff can badge as a success that wouldn't have happened otherwise?
So,
well,
you
I
go
think
first.
it's very
Andy, go
difficult
first.
to say what would or would not have happened, but I think that there's two areas, one which I'm involved in, one which I'm not. The whole graphene story and the connections between the discovery of graphene going on to the nanotechnology lab of Costarellis and others, and the collaboration between them and the neurosurgeons, David Coop and his colleagues, I think it would have happened. I think that it may not have happened so fast. I think that, again, I know I keep repeating this, the profile that it gives, the potential to raise awareness and to drive things forward in a faster way, I think that's one example. Nearer to home, my area is a particular sort of brain tumour called a vestibular schwannoma. And over our time, the four of us working together with a number of noteworthy others, we've discovered that 60% of them grow. We know that 40% of them don't grow, but we didn't know why. And people present usually in middle age. They've gone deaf. They've got ringing in their ear, or whatever, and then the tumour stops growing. But why? And we've discovered through all the things that we've done that it is absolutely directly because of inflammation. So that if you get an inflammatory response in a tumour, it will stop growing. If you get an exuberant inflammatory response, it keeps growing, and the ones that keep growing are the ones that are inflamed. So therefore, you've got a whole potential line of treatment in the next 10 years, where a range of different anti-inflammatory treatments might negate the need to undergo brain surgery at all.
And I think another area where I think the thing is difficult, right, because it takes years to get a treatment from initial discovery through to clinic. But I think there's good cases emerging where the Jeff is certainly facilitating research. And another example is the work of Petra Hammerlich. So Petra Hammerlich moved to Manchester as the chair of translational neuro-oncology, generously supported by the Brain Tumour Charity, which was a great win. And that was a great example of how brain tumours could be a really growth area in Manchester. And what Petra's done in her research is amazing, really. What we want to find is ways to monitor how a disease progresses or how treatments work, what we call a biomarker. So something you can measure, ideally easily, in patients to say, well, by measuring this, something changes within this body fluid or blood that then indicates somebody's either going to get the disease or indicates how the disease progresses. So what Petra's done in her work is begun to show that actually, believe it or not, in the tears you can identify certain changes in certain proteins that might be linked to progression of brain tumours, which is amazing because obviously taking tears is a very simple, very easy way to do it. But now through the Jeff and facilitated through the Jeff, she's now extending that study to say, well, actually, is this specific to brain tumours? Is it a brain tumour response, or actually in stroke or in brain injury or in some more chronic diseases such as Parkinson's, what happens in these tears as well? So she's collecting from all these different patients. And that would only happen, I would argue, because of the links that were facilitated through the Jeff, the link to the Manchester Centre for Clinical Neuroscience, and that ability to roll things out relatively quickly across the city.
I think also we've got to consider the era that we're in. And the NHS is in serious trouble. It's in serious trouble. And I think those of us that work within the NHS have been well aware of the fact that it is firefighting on a day-to-day basis within the NHS. And I think if there wasn't, an umbrella of academic neuroscience through the Jeff that had risen up at the same time as the NHS, sadly started to lose the wheels off the cart, then it would have been really difficult, I think, culturally and just within the organisation to have delivered first-in-man studies at the same time as all those things going on. New discovery and translational work with scientists coming in. I think that the sort of umbrella and brand of the Jeff and the cultural influence that has within both the University of Manchester and wider in other academic institutions across the city, and also within the Manchester Centre for Clinical Neurosciences and the Northern Carolines, the NHS, that has enabled these things to happen despite all of those challenges in the NHS. And I think, Andy, I think you understate it. I think that maybe with all those challenges, if it wasn't for the Jeff, these things would have fallen by the wayside.
No, I would agree, and I think we read in the papers every day, and you said it yourself, and Andy and other clinicians are on the front line of the challenges in NHS. But I think the Jeff offers this opportunity really to really try and take the discoveries from the university, the researchers, the scientists, and move them into the clinic faster, right, and make that difference, and maybe in a way that's more efficient and actually better to do. And I think, from the outset, you asked us back at the start of the podcast how we started, and actually we had tremendous support. One of the reasons this happened in the first place was we had amazing support, which doesn't always happen, from the university leadership. So from Nancy herself and others within the senior leadership in the university and the faculty, Graham Lord when he was here, Peter Clayton, through to the NCA, the Northern Care Alliance. So the chief executive, David Dalton at the time, and those that followed, really got this vision. They got it, and actually, it's rare to get those individuals round the table agreeing. And actually, we sat in many meetings and sold them the vision that Andy and I had with others, that this is what we wanted it to be. And I think 5 years down the line, we're very proud of where it's got to. And I think to me, it's really now got to the start of its proper journey, and that it's a brand. People talk about it. It's known. People. We've got a great logo. We've got. There's no question the brand exists. Now the question is to say, well, okay, let's take that now and really catapult it to the next level, which is getting that funding, and the story, and getting the evidence that actually things we've done do make a difference to patients. And I think that's the next step.
It's true, and the examples there, both. I mean, I think the doctors at the hospital really like being part of it. They're really proud of it. When we have meetings, they talk proudly about it. That 4 neurosurgeons did something I can't even imagine. Ran the Berlin Marathon, raising money. Patients who've gone through have then said, "Oh, we'd like to pay back for what you've done," and have walked across hot coals. I was asked to do it, but thought
we're still working on that.
Yeah, I'm working on it. But
something worse.
But patients have gone out and raised money. Doctors have gone out and raised money. Research people in the R&I department have gone out and raised money. So it feels good because it's real. It's not feel good because Stuart and I are great salesmen that go around saying, "Oh yeah, this is a really nice."
Well, you are a great salesman.
Well, thank you. But people go, "Yeah, this is important. This is what the difference will make." One of the things about being a surgeon, as you know, Omar, is you go to theatre and you operate on a brain tumour and you operate on 1 or maybe 2 a day, and you make a difference, and you hope you make a difference. But the fundamental problems of the condition are not clinical. And the problem with being a scientist, and almost both the appeal and the lack of attraction of being a clinician scientist, is that you can go your whole life as a scientist. You may move the dial a little bit, but you may not make a colossal difference in the incremental way that individual patients do. But if you do find something, you will make a difference to many, many thousands of people. So for me, being a clinical academic means that I can do an operation, and that's great. And if the scientists discover something brilliant, then I can hang on their coattails with that as well.
So, okay, so I think we can conclude that it has been a success, this 5 years. It has done what we wanted it to do at this point, and more probably. It's a thing now. It's a brand. It's accepted. It's liked. It feels a bit like a snowball gathering snow, getting bigger and bigger now, which is a good thing. But the leadership's changed, of course. The environment has changed, and we've got different leadership in the academic institutions in Manchester. We've got different leadership in the NHS institutions. So what do you think the future holds for the Jeff now?
So I think the future is about, one, engaging the new leadership in both organisations. You're absolutely right, and thinking how we move forward with of course the strategic goals and ambitions of these organisations, and maybe how the new people see that. Is to demonstrate what we've done thus far and the ambitions we've got, and the realism that we can achieve this, and actually we have the capability to do what we're trying to do. That what we're doing, in Manchester, there's no question is it's not unique, because I don't think anything is ever unique, but we actually compete in a international level in terms of what we're trying to achieve, and it's comparable to these centres. I think a key thing is to make people believe in it, and what I mean by that is not, it's a centre and it's a research centre, and there's research centres all over the university, all over the country. which sometimes tend to be very exclusive. So it's only the scientists that are part of it. You know what I mean? My view in the Jeff, and I think Andy shares this very much, is this: anyone who works with patients in these areas is part of the Jeff, right? The patients themselves, we've heard about that from the point of view generously fundraise, the nurses who look after the patients, anybody involved at any point in the pathway of the patient care, to me, is part of the Jeff. That's what we want them to be. Similarly, a PhD student who's just started their journey in research, who's maybe doing something in a dish of cells that is a long way from a patient, but actually may ultimately lead to a treatment for a patient, they are part of the Jeff as well. And I think it's about building that belonging, and if you do that, then you create a really vibrant community who wants to move it forward. And I think that we've done that in part, and I think we need to grow that a bit further. And of course, the major measure of success and is ambition is, and it has to be said, is funding, because funding is really what will make or break us, and that's on the line, because any organisation, any initiative needs funding, because you need people, because people make things happen, and people cost money. That's just, some people do things voluntary, they go out and do charity work, but we have to employ people to do. One, to manage the Jeff, we've got a great centre manager, and interim centre manager and administrator, but actually these are people on short-term contracts, and it's difficult. We need to find funding.
I think it's really interesting. The timing of when funding comes into a research centre like the Jeff is an interesting question, isn't it? Because I think the Jeff is quite interesting in that you use the word, unique before. I think it probably is fairly unique that the Jeff started without much money, lots of support, but not much money given to get it going, unlike a lot of research centres that start with here's £2 million, get your research centre going. The Jeff didn't start with that. It started, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but with a pretty small pot of money, but lots of support and lots of enthusiasm. And I think it's quite interesting, because I think it's developed so successfully in that organic way and continues to do so without having that huge amount of seed money at the beginning. But it does feel now, like at this point, now that it's kind of proven itself, that a bit of an injection of cash would make a difference. I don't know. Do you think that's?
I think that's where the profile comes in, and I think there's that we all know that the NHS has got financial challenges, the academic world has got financial challenges. I think the fact that you make that we had to be very careful about money, that we had a very limited amount of money that we appreciated very much, that we used, I think, very well, meant there was no financial cliff to fall off. Yeah. Because it wasn't we'd been given a vast sum of money and then that's it, sort yourselves out. We've always known we've needed to raise the money, and hopefully with conditions that are really serious, that scientists need to cure, we can manage, you and I and clinicians like us, but we need scientists to cure. The fact that we know we've got to keep raising the money, and we have a story to tell, we have an entity, we can persuade people to raise that money, whether that's somebody giving £5 because they're happy with their treatment, or ideally philanthropists giving us vast amounts of money to make massive difference. I mean, it is important to note that, again, going back to the difference between being a clinician, it's an easy life compared with a scientist. You do an operation, you see someone in clinic, hopefully you help. Sometimes you don't. That's the nature of it. But a scientist, you can, I mean, I don't know what the stats are for the likelihood of getting a grant. Is it 10% of any grants you get?
Yeah, approximately 10%.
Approximately 10%. And each grant takes you, well, from my observation, a lot of people 3 to 6 months to get. So most of the time, and it's not like, well done, you've done quite well, you'll have a little bit of a grant. It's absolutely black and white. You do all that work, and 90% of the time you don't get the grant, and it varies between how good you are, and Stuart and Dave are outstanding. But if you had philanthropy money or large amounts of patients contributing, and both are invaluable, then if you've got an idea, rather than spending 6 months writing a grant, you can spend 6 months trying to discover how to cure the disease. And that, I think, is the central bit. Now we've got the profile, raise it and persuade people that we have the people across the patch who can do things, but we need the funds to make it happen. That would be a big message for me.
Brilliant. But what I've brilliantly done there, Andy, is bring us full circle back to you walking on hot coals to raise money for the Jeff. So can we on air get agreement from Professor King that he's going to walk across hot coals for the Jeff?
Should that be necessary?
So we're going to start bringing the podcast to a close now. But before we do, if people listening to this want to contribute to the Jeff or want to make a donation, how should they go about doing it?
So the best way, the easiest way is through our website. So we've just revamped, we've just did a revamp of our website, and we've redesigned and created a brand new page for people to engage with the Jeff. So that page outlines exactly what the sort of projects we're looking for support for. You know, we've identified a number of projects across all the areas of the Jeff where people have asked for support, and that ranges from a few £1,000s up to several £100,000. Or more if people want to give more, and it's very clear how you can give and donate through that web. So the web page is the best way to do it. Or if people want to engage with us, we've got an email again on the web page. You'll see the email to contact us. Do reach out. You know, we're really keen to work and speak to people about what we're trying to do and move it forward. Because ultimately, you know, the vision and the mission of setting the Jeff up was to improve outcomes and improve patient lives. That is the absolute fundamental #1 priority, and we're all working in that direction. So it'd be great to hear from everyone.
Well, thank you very much, Stuart, Andy and Omar. It's really inspiring to hear about the Jeff and to be involved with it. Any final words, Omar?
Yeah, I just want confirmation. You did say yes, Andy, to the calls.
I did say yes.
There we go. There we go.
That's been great. Thanks for giving us the time to speak.
Yes, thanks very much.
This has been the Brain Fix podcast. Any feedback on this or future content or sponsorship inquiries, please send to the DNS inbox. That's dns@manchester.ac.uk with the word podcast in the subject line. Tune in next time for more neuroscience.